in each one of these chips is probably 1 gigabyte. The note says not to scale, so certainly it's not correct size. In terms of relative sizes of those things, what do we think the actual relative sizes would be? Why is it not to scale? If it was drawn to scale, what would it look like? So I think if it was to scale, this would be going off, well beyond the slide, many pages deep. The scale of the capacitor compared to the scale that you need for the control parts is much bigger. But it's all still really small. We're talking nanometers kinds of scale here. So we think of DRAM as memory that once we turn off our machine, its state is lost. It has to be continually refreshed to keep that storage. But the reality is, it's just a capacitor. So after we turn off our machine and we stop refreshing the DRAM, the values are still going to be there for a while. So here's what that looks like. This is 5 seconds after turning off the machine, when the machine was turned off with memory storing this image of the Mona Lisa. And 5 seconds later, you can still see it's certainly a very recognizable image. Some of the bits are wrong by then. Some of the bits that were supposed to be a 1 have lost enough of the value in the capacitor to no longer represent the right value. Once you've waited about 30 seconds, still very recognizable. After about 5 minutes, there may be some traces still, but pretty hard to guess what the picture was. Why do we care about this? Yes, exactly. Okay, good. So I should mention one other thing. So they don't actually have to read it quickly. What they have to do is freeze it quickly. So the way these images were created was not trying to, at 30 seconds, read everything. But once you freeze the DRAM, it takes a really long time to lose its charge. So if it's cold enough, it's losing the charge very slowly. If you didn't have the capability to freeze it, you could still extract it. But what you really want to do is, if you are evil and trying to get data from someone's computer, and the main thing you're probably trying to get are keys that are stored in memory. If you can get their computer, and assuming they're somewhat sophisticated, they have in a lock state. So your phone, you need to enter a PIN or something to unlock it. If they couldn't unlock it, they don't have a way to get your memory without extracting it from the physical phone, and then it's going to lose whatever it was storing. As long as the persistent memory is encrypted, you're okay. But the problem is, if they can get it out of your device and then freeze it, and then they can hook it up to their equipment that can unfreeze it and read what's there, the bits that were in it when it was in your machine are still there. And these pictures are from a paper that talks about doing it. It's called these cold boot attacks, where they looked at how vulnerable keys are that are stored in memory on systems where the hard drive or any persistent storage is encrypted. The keys are still going to be stored in memory anytime they're being used. And if someone gets that device, even if it's locked, if they can extract the memory, freeze it quickly enough, they can probably get the keys. And one of the authors was a UVA student before going to Princeton on this. These are physical devices. I'm glad you mentioned physics as part of what makes storage complicated. Anything that we're actually storing has some physical representation of it. And the physical realities are very different from the abstractions that we think about as programmers most of the time. So in terms of the properties the DRAM gives us, what are things that we care about when we're thinking about designing a storage system? If you're buying memory, what properties in the memory would you like to know? Yes? Good. How much there is? How many bits can you store? That's actually not on the spec. Good you got that, even though it's a trick question, or it's a misleading spec. And this was 8 gigabytes. So certainly knowing how many bits you can store is one of the important properties about memory. What else do you care about? Yeah, so how long does it take you to read a bit? We talked about these delay lines where the time it takes to read a bit varies depending on which bit you're reading and when you're reading it. For DRAM, usually it's about the same time to read any bit, but it's not always exactly the same. The time it's going to take is fairly fuzzy from this, and part of the reason it's fuzzy from this is it's not exactly the same time depending on what you're doing. The cycles here are 11 cycles. The cycle speed is not the same as the processor cycle speed. It's the cycle speed of this hardware, and that works out to about 13 nanoseconds, or 13.75 nanoseconds, if it takes 11 cycles to read one particular row. 13 nanoseconds is pretty good. It's really not anything close to what it takes to read from a physical disk. Then we're talking millions of nanoseconds, but still slower than what it takes to read from the SRAM storage. We've got 2 entries in our table now. We've got the Mercury delay line that was used in many early computers, including UNIVAC. The time to access depends on
So, jetzt geht es um den sogenannten Cache. Der Cache ist ein spezieller Pufferspeicher, wie ich ihn vorher schon erwähnt habe. Und der Cache, der liegt im Prinzip oder befindet sich in der CPU. Da gibt es verschiedene Caches, L1, L2, manchmal L3. L steht für Level, das heißt, man hat hier sogenannte Ebenen und je höher die Ebene, also 1 ist eben näher an den Berechnungen dran als 2 und 3. So, vom Cache aus hat man dann den Zugriff auf den Arbeitsspeicher, hier als RAM abgekürzt. Und unten dran hängt dann vielleicht die Festplatte. Eine ähnliche Darstellung habe ich schon mal aufgezeichnet. Wir können es aber ruhig nochmal machen. Und zwar beim Cache geht es darum, dass der Programmcode oder auch die Daten möglichst schnell in den Prozessor gelangen können und dort vorgehalten werden können. Das heißt, manchmal werden Daten auch einfach so aus dem Arbeitsspeicher geholt, obwohl der Prozessor noch gar nicht die zum Berechnen braucht. Aber die lädt man einfach vor, dass nachher, wenn es vielleicht dazu kommt, dass dieser Teil vom Programmcode ausgeführt wird, dass die Daten dann einfach schon da liegen und nicht erst geholt werden muss. Ja, weil der Zugriff, den Arbeitsspeicher bzw. der Zugriff auf die Festplatte, die dauern immer länger als der Zugriff auf den Cache.